I'm going to do something a little bit out of the ordinary for me. I'm going to actually rift up a new kind of presentation, which I don't normally do, but because this is Verbalize, we're going to start something new and talk to you about breaking ground in space. But the first thing I want you to do is I want you to close your eyes and listen to your surroundings for a moment. So what is it you hear? Eyes are closed. Don't verbalize it. In your mind, can it be described as noise? Would you be so bold to characterize it as music? Or is it both, or is it neither? The choice is obviously entirely up to you to define what you hear. But further to this, what do you think the potential of the people in this space is tonight to foster community? Well after the 5 speakers on tonight's program are finished, and after AEMCON completes its inspiring program on Sunday. On a broader scale, what is the potential that music can play in the future of this city, on this land, particularly at this time in the evolution of this place? And as you think about it, the choice is up to all of us to listen, to process, to shape. You can open up your eyes now. Listening can reveal many things. Last century, the influential American artist John Cage composed a seminal work called 433 in about 1947-48, which is still considered by many to, well, depending on who you ask, Cage was sometimes better known than he was for his musical works. As in the case of 433, the concept was a musical composition that was scored for any instrument. As you can see, this is the original score, or combinations of instruments performed over 3 sections that equaled 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Except that the instrument or the instruments did not perform one single note during the performance of the work. Instead, Cage reversed the concert experience by putting the focus on listening, not to the performers on stage holding the musical instruments, but to sounds that occurred within the space where the performers occurred, so that the composition itself became what was heard within the space at the moment. The net effect of this very controversial concept at the time was the idea that any sound could be considered music that occurred during a period of time. This type of concept became known as chance performance or indeterminacy. The chance being that there was always an element of newness, unknown, and risk about a performance, given that and this became an aesthetic that became synonymous with John Cage throughout his long life as a prolific artist. Because we are on the eve tonight of AEMCON's conference, in a sense, Cage gave musicians, composers, and the general public a whole artistic aesthetic permission to go well beyond the tonalities of standard instrumentation like violins and pianos and trumpets and guitars, and engage with an infinite possibilities of sound around you, incorporating non-musical sounds into music, including sounds that at the time in the late 1940s and early 50s were derived electrically, a foreshadowing of electronic music's future progress. So how does the story about John Cage's 433 and the importance of listening through silence relate to how a physical space can change a creative community and place? This is the first page of John Cage's score in the 1940s. It's the first page. And what have I learned from this ongoing journey and quest throughout the years that I've been involved in musical spaces and community? Well, what I've observed from my training as a musician, as a musicologist, being on the front lines of building and fostering music culture for over 30 years, is that listening has been a central theme to having a life in music. In other words, listening to the environment around me has been and continues to be critical to being put in a position to create the conditions that allow for physical space to materialize and eventually impact a creative community of people, ideas, and ultimately the transformation of a place. I really had no choice in my life but to learn how to listen during my upbringing. I grew up in a really busy city of Montreal where I lived for the first 26 years of my life. There were 5 kids in our family where I was the youngest, 2 parents who were second-generation immigrants who were also multilingual. making our way as a middle-class citizens in a city that was at the center of mainstream urban life in Canada. At that time and to this day, Montreal already had a fully integrated and developed culture with incredible depth, diversity, and choice of numerous and cultural spaces and community that brought them to life. Furthermore, in adding to this complexity, it had also overcome at the time, it was overcome at the time with a palpable tension, seen through the eyes of cultural and language disputes and threats of separation as experienced by two sovereignty referendums. It was challenging for anyone to find a space to be heard amid that noise, when there was already so much noise and chaos around you. My parents sent me to French school for my safety, they said, because they couldn't teach it to me. They only spoke English and Italian. They were concerned about the hostilities that existed between English and French in Canada in the 1970s in Montreal, and felt that the need to speak the language was essential to learn how to coexist in an environment. And throughout this chaos, I stumbled upon music. I was drawn to these blank pages as an escape from the noise around me. Music was already somewhere or everywhere in our home and neighborhood, yet I didn't realize that it would introduce me to a world of discovery until I put on a set of headphones and drowned out the noise that was around me. In that short period of time, I became committed to music at a relatively young age. It just happened. Later on, I discovered that in addition to listening, commitment was necessary to building creative space and community, and it wasn't necessarily easy. It was going to be really hard. Our house was full of music. My father introduced me to the music of African, Canadian, and Americans whose records he loved, especially singers and piano players. My mother and siblings introduced me to the soundtracks of musical theater and the music of the day, the city where I lived, to the music culture that was available on the streets, as well as in the venues and the clubs in the day and late at night. In those days, Montreal was a city where you became an adult at a very young age because of the ever-present nature of culture, and most embraced it. Most didn't, or many didn't, and they moved away. In this journey of discovery, the piano appealed to me, so I studied it, and I studied everything about music that I found of interest, and spent a significant amount of my free time listening and trying to understand the conditions by which the expression of music, i.e. the learned craft of playing it. And in a roundabout way, I discovered that the creation of places where music happens showed much more greater interest to me. This sowed the seeds for what eventually became a full-time journey with no plan B that continues to this day as a listener, an observer, and a doer of musical things. I got drawn to campus radio at Concordia University in Montreal, future musical studies at Edmonton and Calgary, and then seeking out learning from mentors on the front lines of music who were space makers and community builders in both music and non-music worlds. Eventually in Calgary in the late 1990s, several chance encounters occurred, and being at the right place at the right time opened up opportunities, including I became the first staff member of what was then called Cantos Music Foundation, which led to be given the opportunity to shape and direct the development of the creation of a musical instrument collection and equipment for 18 years, beginning in 1998. It was there that I first witnessed firsthand the importance of collaboration, another key learning to a space and community, as we had a space, but very little else in terms of budget and what to do with it. So we became a do-it-yourself culture and built additional support over the years, over time. And how did that occur? Largely by listening to the desires of do-it-yourselfers in this particular city and philanthropists who believed in giving the gift of music was not so much about how to do that, but just the premise of doing it. From 1998 onwards, I continued to listen carefully and seek out what was being said about this land and its future, and wondered out loud if music could have a future in this city, an important future, a broad future. This included many things: living behind the ship and anchor, where my basement apartment was situated and listening to conversations at the back door of the Ship and Anchor, many of them. Seeking out listening to how musical cultures around the world develop and how the places were formed, and how those places were formed and on what terms. Identifying and listening carefully to mentors and people that were inspirational here on this Treaty 7 land, here in Mohkinstsis, here in Calgary, in Alberta, in Canada. One of my biggest musical mentors said to me, if you want a life in music, have nothing to fall back on and you won't fall back. Listen to people who really wanted to develop East Village, one of Calgary's oldest lands. And how could it be regenerated into something different, into something new, with a sense of hope? Listen to the reasons why music would never have a role in shaping a place. And there was a lot of people out there that believed that, especially in Calgary. Now, I didn't necessarily agree with them, but I listened nonetheless. So this has been a journey, what a journey it has been, and what a journey it continues to be as a listener. But after enough listening, opportunities present themselves, and action or inaction become choices. What actions are necessary in today's time to foster creative spaces and community in place? I would ask you to consider that. My own experience to date has taught me the following: passion, collaboration, understanding, determination, a sense of healing, a sense of resilience, and being vulnerable are at necessary times and in varying degrees. To illustrate this point, I'd like to take 60 seconds and 3 volunteers to create our own sort of Cajun musical experience. So Jeff and Tara and Owen are going to come up really quickly, and I'm going to count time. Where's Tara? In front of me here, I have three singing healing bowls from the National Music Center collection, that we acquired through an oncologist who I met in the late 1990s, named Mitch Gaynor, who's no longer with us. And every time Mitch would meet a new patient who was recently diagnosed with cancer, the first and probably scariest meeting that they would ever have would be with their oncologist. And what he did to bridge that gap of fear and healing is that he would play these singing bowls for them on their first visit to their oncologist. So for 60 seconds, I want to do a Cajun chants performance. This is sort of my 60 seconds versus John's 4:33. And I want you to listen for 60 seconds. So, performers, play from the heart. Go. So after listening, what I'm hearing today regarding the continued need to foster spaces so that our community can meaningfully continue to build community and placemaking. I'm hearing not only this, but I'm hearing some very inspiring things out here in our community. I'm hearing that you need to show up to build space. You need to commit. You need to work to create your own space. Wherever it is, in whatever capacity, you have at your disposal to do it. But it is essential that you do it. I'm hearing that our community of creators and artists and managers and impresarios, agents, directors, venue operators, leaders of all kind need to continue to work together more than ever to build and sustain our creative community. I'm hearing that resources are in jeopardy, and we need to act to find a way to keep our community vibrant and vital. But that could lead also to new opportunities that have not been there for our community before. I'm hearing that Alberta's AEMCON is a leading voice in Canada's electronic music community and emerging to be a pillar in Alberta's musical ecosystem. I'm hearing that there is a real desire to learn more about how music can play a role on this land, in our cities and towns, in a meaningful way through a Music Cities movement. What are you hearing? Are you carefully listening to what you're hearing around you, either in your mind or as it relates to this place, this space, and this community? Does listening reveal a silence that we don't realize is there, as Cage espoused over a century ago with 433? Have you heard anything in the silence tonight? Are you going to fill that space? How are you going to fill that space? What actions are you going to take in this community to continue to foster community spaces? What inspires you, and what levels of commitment will or can you give to this movement? It could be as simple as volunteering, purchasing a ticket to a show. Instead of getting one for free, going to a concert to hear music that is foreign to you. There are so many ways for you to participate. Physical space can be anywhere, and it can change a community in an instant, such as AEMCON and ATB have done tonight. From dirt, you can go to something else. If you put the time into it, if you build community, if you listen. Think about what you hear from listening to the silence, and look for clues that could inspire you, and take action to foster our creative community, our spaces, and our places. It can happen if you're listening carefully, and then find it in yourself to act. For the next 10 seconds, let's honor Cage's controversial concept of silence and ask ourselves what we can do for our creative community, its spaces in this place. Listen to what you hear. Over the next 10 seconds, I'll keep time. Thank you.
Besides, curating music, I also DJ, and for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to be focusing on my role as a cultural producer working in DIY spaces. My talk title is Get Rich or DIY Trying, Resisting Gatekeeping Tendencies. So I've never had any formal arts training. I went to school, I was going to go to med school actually, and then I decided that fuck that, I didn't want to be in the hospital ever, so I dropped out of that. So I do have background in kind of like health policies and stuff, and then I was like, fuck it, I'm going to be a filmmaker, and I started doing that. So, how I became an artist was by accident, but how I got to where I am now was not an accident at all, and it took the support of so many people that were willing to take a risk on me, so many people that mentored me, that gave me gear, that gave me space, that taught me skills. You know, like I never had any formal training, so my community was my school and my education to be an artist. I mean, I could kind of explain this piece. So this is just like my eternal conflict, you know, as a DIY producer. You know, you always kind of want to quit every single time you do an event, and this dog is telling me to sleep, and the other dog is telling me to do more shows. This is my art. Yeah, I'm 50 yen. Yeah. So this is the controller that I first got. I didn't get it through these methods. Thankfully, I have a very supportive community that made sure I wasn't committing too many crimes to get where I am today. So I started, I co-founded Chapel Sound in 2012, and that's when I decided to quit school at that point and to kind of dive into this new venture as an artist. And at that time in Vancouver, in 2012, it was a really exciting space for electronic music. But at that point, there wasn't really much room for like after-hour rave vibes where you could play a lot of rap music and R&B that's kind of crossed over with like techno and electronic music, because there's so much kind of house music and techno that's going on in Vancouver, but you know, to us that felt like kind of like an old guard. You know, like I wanted to drop a rap track like at 3 a.m. and to be okay. But that scene did not quite exist at that point in 2012, and we knew that there was a need for it, so we started kind of jamming in our living room, you know, 5 person at a time. And obviously there was a need for it, so people started coming. So from a 5-person jam in the living room to like a 500-person multi-room after-hour rave, you know, we grew quite exponentially. And then as we grew, then all these people wanted to start fucking with us. You know, obviously, it's like, oh, these guys can make money now. Because, you know, for a long time, it was like, people didn't want us in the clubs. You know, the music we played it was too weird to be in the club. It wasn't mainstream, like, rap music that was, or mainstream electronic music that was palatable for the clubs. And it wasn't specific, you know, like the Vancouver kind of like after-hour kind of house and techno music. So we kind of had to carve our own space. But, you know, with a new generation of audience, people wanted it. So we were able to develop and grow our scene and our community that way. And as we grew, you know, as someone who was carving out a scene because there wasn't a place for us, and we felt like there were gatekeepers that, you know, were holding on to the spaces and the resources that they had, we were like, fuck it, we're going to do our own thing. But as we grew, then people were like, other emerging artists and other DJs, they started hitting us up, and they're like, oh, can I play on your show? Can we do this? Like, can you come play with us? Or can you come play in our lineup and stuff? And as we grew and got more social clout, you know, we realized that, oh shit, we're becoming gatekeepers ourselves. And the thing with that was, when I came to that realization, I realized that we had something, and we had access to something that other people wanted. And I didn't really want to be that kind of gatekeeper. I didn't want to be the same gatekeeper that got us started in the first place. You know, we wanted to be able to have this open kind of jam vibe where people could come and join us without much inhibition. But at a certain point, when you get to a certain size, you kind of have to set these kind of boundaries in order to maintain your own mental wellness or your safety. And, you know, when you play a show at night, there's only so many hours you can play. There's like a 5-hour lineup or 7-hour lineup. You can only slot so many people in one night. So we had to figure out another way to redefine the relationships that we have with our people and our community. So what other relationships could I have with people beyond playing shows together? So the kind of relationships I'm talking about is like relationships such as like artist versus promoter / curator, or audience versus like the performer. You know, these are the relationships that are what we're traditionally used to in a space, but how do we redefine that relationship? At that point, I realized my position has changed in the scene. We're no longer this like DIY underdog, like, you know, group of DJs or artists that like are trying to carve out space. Like we've carved out a space, and now other people want to be a part of the space that we've carved out. So what can we do to continuously carve out more spaces for the people and to stay true to what we wanted to do in the first place, is to create space for music that might not traditionally be accepted within the mainstream culture. There's no need to hang on to specific aesthetics. You know, I think it's important to think about culture as something that's ever evolving. Culture is not stagnant. You know, like, I mean, like, you can only play house music at 125 BPM for so long before it gets kind of boring. So, no hate here. Time changes, right? So, a huge part of this talk, I want to just drill it into everyone here, is make fucking space. So how do we do that? So exclusionary behavior, you know, happens, and it's natural for people to be exclusive, you know, because we only have so much capacity. At a certain point of your career, you know, everyone's hitting you up, everybody wants to get on your show, everybody wants you to play, and you just only have certain capacity. And so I understand the limitations of your resources and energy, but what are you gonna do about it now that you got here, now that you got to a place where you're comfortable being an artist in the music industry or in the scene? How are you going to maintain those relationships to the community that has supported you for so many years? And how do you build and maintain boundaries that can also keep you going? So this picture is, so this is from this summer. I'm part of a new initiative. We've been going on for 3 years called Current Feminist Electronic Art Symposium. And this whole cohort is part of our mentorship cohort. So we are doing workshops and mentorships to produce new cultural producers in Vancouver, because that's the way to make space and to make way for new people. Over the years, I've gotten all these resources on like how to write grants, how to do budgets, how to, you know, do collaborations and sponsorships, relationships with venues, relationships with labels, booking agents, and all that stuff. What can we do to pass on that information that you've gained over the years? A mentorship program is the perfect way to do so, and it's a great way to enable a new generation of people to have the agency to also do the things that you were doing many years ago without maybe having as many hiccups that you've had, you know, because why should people suffer twice? Now that you know it, just pass that wisdom on. It's important to invest in the cultivation of emerging scenes, because it also separates it from my own ego. You know, for a long time I was like, okay, I'm directing this show, I'm directing this festival, this is this thing, you know, I feel a sense of ownership over it. And you know, everything is like, I gotta do this way, I gotta curate it, you know, having kind of this control aspect of, with all the things that I do. But the thing is, when you can actually support emerging scenes, that what you're doing there is, it's actually helping you create a separation. And it also is actually kind of healthy for you, like mentally too, because I don't actually have the capacity anymore to stay up till 5 a.m. like every weekend. You know, this just comes with aging. And we're all gonna age here, so I'm telling you this now. So essentially we have like a symbiotic kind of like evolution that is happening. So with these, the cohort of people that we're working with, I'm able to now learn about like what 17-year-olds are listening to, what Gen Zs are up to. You know, I'm learning things that I would not learn on my own. You know, I'm learning about their new taste. I'm learning about new identity politics, new ways to do certain things that my generation, you know, as burnout millennials, that we don't know anything about. And I just wanted to kind of preface this, like, talk a little bit about how we got to this place. So how we got to this current symposium, we started a Chapel Sound Festival. So this is kind of backtracking to like that 500-person party. And we're like, oh shit, what do we do now? Like, we have all these following, what can we do? So we're like, okay, let's create a festival. This happened in 2015 or 16, I can't remember right now at the moment. But essentially we did like a 3-day festival, and we booked all local artists, and then we hosted a bunch of workshops and panels. Because we felt like this was an opportunity. Now we had the resources and we had the following. We had enough people that would want to come to our shows and festival. It was a great time to launch a festival. And it was through one of the panels that we organized. It was called Women in Electronic Music and Art and Creative Technology, or something like that. And that is where I met one of Current's co-producer and co-founder, a good friend of mine, Soledad, and Jen Sung, who's also, so that's Jen and Soledad in the picture. And it was through that one panel that we birthed this new project. Because then we were, from that one Chapel Sound panel, where we were already like, okay, we're into weird music, let's talk about it. And then we realized, like, oh shit, there's not enough women and non-binary people that are in this weird music, electronic music scene. So then we're like, okay, now we're on this panel, like, let's make something happen. So that's when we launched Current Symposium in the first year. And then we launched it the second year, and it just got bigger and bigger. And then we were like, okay, so we did a 5-day-long symposium. It's multidisciplinary. You know, we had exhibitions, we have film screenings, we have panels, workshops, we have like late night parties. What now? Like, we could just keep growing and go bigger, but we're like, fuck that. We need to sleep. So we, instead of doing a bigger party, because scaling up is not the only way to go. We don't always have to scale up. We gotta like unlearn that capitalist bullshit. We need to do it differently. So we're like, okay, let's scale down. Instead of paying our artist fees, like, you know, tens of thousands of dollars worth of artist fees, why don't we actually invest the money into our own community? So we were like, okay, why don't we do a mentorship program so we can teach a cohort of people exactly how we produced Current the previous year? Giving them like templates on like budgeting, visa templates, you know, templates on contracts, giving them like past grant information, templates for like sponsorship decks and things like that. And also just going through the actual process of what we did the previous year, so then the entire cohort can also benefit from that, and they can also go out into the world and produce and create their own thing, because we know that we can't do this forever, and you guys can't do this forever. You know, that's the reality. So with Current, and the first year that we were doing it, we were like, okay, Current is for women and non-binary people only. And then as we grew in terms of our mentorship program, we were like, okay, well, things are changing, the world is changing, politics is changing, we have to kind of like respond to the world. So this year, Current Symposium, we opened it up to also Black, Indigenous, people of color artists. So it's open to all BIPOCs and women and non-binary folks, just because we recognize that often men of color have way more barrier entering the industry than white women, for example. So now that we've launched this program this year, we started working with the City of Vancouver to develop a pilot granting program, so we can potentially create Grantel micro grants without having to worry about, without the people having to worry about, you know, getting a business registration or having like nonprofits. So it was through this journey where we started just playing beats on the floor in the living room until today. This was like a 7-year journey until actually making structural change with the city and creating and piloting new programs. So this is what was possible over the years. And this is what was possible because people had believed and invested and took a risk on the projects that I was interested in. So people often ask, you know, what is Chapel Sound doing nowadays? You know, we had this big blow up, you know, in those years, and it's been kind of quiet, you know, and Chapel Sound has been kind of producing other projects behind the scenes. And, you know, we often, like, we're all still friends, and we're all still homies, and we're all doing our own things. A lot of us are producing for, like, younger emerging artists, or kind of working more on the teaching side of things, or opening up new cafes and new spaces. And we ask ourselves, like, do we need to actually take up space in the scene? Like, people are like, oh, maybe you guys should bring it back, do another Chapel 7 anniversary party. And we're like, nah, you know, we don't really need to take up space, because there are younger people and doing doper shows and doper events. Like, what is the point of us taking up that space? We can be supporting. I could be consulting and mentoring on the back end of things. I don't actually need to physically be on that lineup or be on that interview. That space could be reserved for other people. So I guess right now, I want you guys to all do a thorough assessment of the resources that you have access to that some people may not. So that includes skills, access to venues, access to gear, access to maybe like language, and really think about what you have, or maybe even access to money. Maybe your parents are rich. Access to money. And think about what you have access to that other people don't. You guys are thinking about that right now? You got it? Okay. Second thing. Now I want you to think about, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do with those resources? What are you going to do? You know, I don't want people to feel like paralyzed. You know, a lot of people have like this guilt. And you know, working in this like feminist kind of realm of things, people always talk to me about their guilt. And I'm just like, stop fucking feeling guilty and do something about it. You know, like, it's really not that hard to do something about it. If I'm here speaking to you about this, you can do something about it. Invest in the people around you. Invest in your relationships. Nurture those relationships. Stop operating from like a model of scarcity, because if you can invest in your relationships properly, and if you can nurture those relationships, these relationships can be self-generating and self-sustaining. It's never going to run out. The community and the vibes and the love you have for each other and for your homies and for your crew and for your collective, it doesn't run out. And you know, for me, I do a lot of mentoring, and for me as a mentor, it's the most rewarding thing for me to be able to offer something to someone and see them take that and run with it. And it just makes me feel like, wow, like I'm so thankful that somebody else was able to do that for me. I like making memes. So, I guess at the end of the day, I want people to feel like they have agency. You know, I want people to not feel paralyzed or culturally stagnant. I want everyone to be able to have the agency to connect with different people. People that are different from you. People that come from a different class background. People that come from different educational background. Come from a different discipline. People that have different, you know, maybe physical abilities. People that look different from you. People who come from different family structures than you. Or people who have different kinds of, citizenship status than you. Because, you know, those grants make it pretty hard if you don't have PR or citizenship. And you never know what you can do to really inspire someone else. Resist gatekeeping tendencies. It's really not that difficult to resist those gatekeeping tendencies. Those gatekeeping tendencies stems out of fear. Be a mentor to someone. You all just thought about what you had access to, so now you can take that resource and figure out how you can share that. Your sharing and your redistribution of wealth and resources can really launch someone's entire life journey and career. Everyone in the audience has the potential to create the same spark that it did for me. Thank you.
I just wanna see if I can get through to you. I just wanna see.
Oh, thank you. I was like, oh shit.
If I can get through to you. I just wanna see.
Drug checking in Alberta, the future of harm reduction.
thank you all for being here and listening to me talk about two of my favorite things, harm reduction and substance checking. I want to formally introduce Indigo. We are a harm reduction organization that strives to facilitate a safe, supportive, and unbiased environment for people to access harm reduction support at large events, festivals, and within the nightlife industry. I officially founded Indigo in May 2017, and it all started because I wanted to bring something to the community that helped empowered people and supported people within the industry in itself outside of the music. We create such great spaces in this industry, and I just wanted people to make sure that they were having a great time and making it home at the end of the night. I lost way too many loved ones to the opioid crisis here in Canada or North America, and I just wanted to make sure that all of you made it home safe. So what exactly do we do as an organization? We provide safe spaces at events. We provide spaces that allow people to come to get information and education and not be judged about it, or to be able to come and have substance de-escalation or psychedelic de-escalation, or access peer support, or have a mental health somebody to be able to access to have mental health support as well too when they're at events, or even just an area to come and relax and get away from the chaos of what can be at a large event or festival, or even within the nightlife industry in itself as well. We provide harm reduction outreach at these events as well, whether it's an educational table or we have actual roamers out in the crowds engaging, watching over people, and providing active by-center intervention training and be able to bring people back to our space without having to be kicked out of the event. Another thing we do, which I'll talk a lot more about in this presentation, is substance checking. So we're giving people a chance to be able to determine what exactly they're consuming. And then we also do overdose prevention training. So we are a part of the Take Home Naloxone program with Alberta Health Services, and we do on-site education and naloxone kit distribution at festivals, events, wherever we might be. We also do consent culture education and promotion. So we're providing education into people and to be able to understand what consent is, and also doing active by-center intervention when we're out at events as well. Injury and illness prevention. A lot of you, I'm sure, have experienced what it's like to be at a marathon of a festival. So we are making sure that you're taking care of yourself, you're not developing any foot injuries or dehydration or having any mental health psychosis when you're there as well too, which leads into the on-site mental health support. A lot of our team members come from various backgrounds, whether that's grief counseling, substance addiction counseling, or mental health nurses as well too. Community engagement is one of our hugest things as well too. We've been a part of a lot of policy development within the municipal government in Edmonton. So Edmonton is actually going to be becoming the first city in North America where it's going to be regulated by law that your event over 1,500 people is providing that your event has harm reduction support at it. So I think that's a very great. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'm really proud of that and about the amount of support that we've had within the city to be able to have those bylaws. Some interesting data that I am actually so proud to talk about that I just recently calculated for Indigo is that from June 2018 to November 2019, we have interacted with over 20,500 Albertans at 15 large EDM events and festivals within the 2 years that we have been enacted as an organization. I was actually very overwhelmed with the amount of data that we have collected. It's pretty amazing. So before I begin, I just kind of want to bring it back to the basis of what exactly harm reduction is and what does it mean to you? Because the ideal that I like to encompass when it comes to harm reduction is it isn't just about psychoactive substances. We look both ways before we cross the street. We wear a life jacket when we're out on a boat. We wear a helmet when we're bike riding. There's so many philosophies when it comes to harm reduction that we forget that it's enacted in our everyday life, that they're practices that we don't really think about when we do it. But in general, harm reduction is an umbrella term for programs, policies, and practices to be able to reduce risk and reduce harm associated to somebody, whether that's related to psychoactive substances or not. It involves a range of non-judgmental approaches and strategies, and it empowers people who use drugs, which is the core of harm reduction. Harm reduction is about giving that voice back to people who use substances, because we are the people that are going to be able to create programs the most when it comes to caring about people who use substances. We meet people where they're truly at. And I think that's such a oversaid thing in harm reduction, but it is so true. We don't care where you are. We don't care what you do. We are just there to make sure that you make it home and that you live the most healthiest life that you can without having to quit what you are doing within your life, because we don't judge you. We provide a positive non-judgment, and we don't talk you into doing something. We don't talk you into going to treatment. We don't talk you into not doing substances. We just meet you where you're at. So I really want to talk kind of about the difference between harm reduction with a capital H and R and harm reduction with all lower cases, because this really encompasses what Indigo as an organization is. So harm reduction with capital H and capital R is a philosophy and political movement focused on shifting power and resources to people who are most vulnerable to structural violence. So I like to analyze this as Indigo. We are not only out there on the streets, whereas harm reduction with all lower cases, that's us on the street providing services and the fundamental beliefs of providing those services. But we're also a movement. We have created this movement in harm reduction outside of highly dependence issues, and been able to create this movement of people that use substances outside of those. So we've been able to make sure that people have a voice, even if they engage in substances outside or recreationally. And I always like to say that in a loose term as well, because let's be real, in our industry, in our community, in our scene, there's definitely dependence issues. But there's a large majority of people who use substances without being dependent. And I also like to move that philosophy into substance checking. Substance checking in Alberta has been a huge movement. We have had underground movements of substance checking for years, but it is time now that we move this into a political movement. We are so far behind when it comes to other provinces in Canada that we need to catch up. So substance checking is a strategy that we provide to people who use substances, and we empower people to be able to know what they're consuming. It is the only quality assurance program that we have in the illicit market, and it allows people to actually know what they're consuming. Not only is substance checking allows us to be able to determine what we're putting in our bodies, but as harm reduction workers, it allows a great hook, because substance checking is amazing, it's beautiful, but we also want to be able to hook you in to have those meaningful conversations and create individualized strategies and moments with you on how we can help determine and give you advice into what you can do with that moment. Sorry, this thing is I've never done this before with this. It feels so weird. But so it allows us to hook you in and give you a creative individual message into what you're doing right in that moment. So it's a beautiful thing, other than just being able to tell you what you're consuming. We can talk about dosing, we can talk about nutrition, we can talk about timing of the substance as well, and even the effects of what you're looking for in a substance. So methods of substance checking that we have used with Indigo, mostly in the past couple of years, is reagent testing. And other organizations across Western Canada or Canada in itself has started off with reagent testing as too. It's simple, it's easy, it's low cost, you need minimal training for it, and it's a colorimetric system. So basically you take your substance, a little bit of it, and we take a chemical on top of it, and we drop it on, and we base that reaction of color, like fumes that come off of the substance as well. And we try and determine where that substance fits on the spectrum. You can kind of see it here in this diagram of what exactly that substance is. Reagent testing has its limitation in regards that it's very presence versus abstinence. So the only thing that we can tell you, and when you come into us as well, we have you read this limitations that we have with substance, or limitations and legalities towards substance checking, is that I cannot tell you what else is in your substance, only that it indicates that that substance is there. And there's no other information about any other components that's in your substance. Next, we have fentanyl and benzodiazepine test strips. So they were originally actually developed for testing substances in somebody's urine. So it was mostly what you would have somebody go and do a drug screening test. And there's been so much research into developing substance checking for fentanyl testing that this is actually the most effective way for determining if fentanyl is in your substance. And it is able to detect trace amounts of fentanyl in some analogs, such as carfentanil. So it's really effective into determining whether fentanyl is present in this substance. But again, we come back to the fact that it's only able to tell us that that substance is present there. So it's not telling us how much it is, what type of analog it is, or the potency and strength of that substance, which is really limiting. Laboratory technology is the final one that we have when it comes to substance checking. And there's so many different types of laboratory technologies out there. They produce highly accurate results, and they detect many variant constitutions of a substance and can provide results with dosage and concentration. The hard thing about those laboratory technologies is that they're actually stuck in a lab, and they can't really be brought out to a festival or event, and they are usually permanent locations. Some technologies are available on site at festivals, which we move into, and this is the hardest word for me to pronounce because I actually have a speech impediment for pronouncing R's. So I always say FTIR because I'm not going to straggle in front of you all. So we have an FTIR machine. And I'm going to give a layman description of what an FTIR does. Basically, inside of the machine, there's a diamond. And through that diamond, a ray of light is shot up into a tiny amount of a sample, and it detects the absorption rate of that light. And then it takes that pattern that it's developed of absorption, and it compares it to other absorption patterns in the data library of the software called Opus. It's highly effective when it comes to mobile testing, and it doesn't destroy the sample, which is a huge thing within other communities or demographics and outside of the festival communities, or you move into like supervised consumption sites where that's very important for somebody because they've spent all of the money that they have on a substance, so we're able to give that substance back to that person, which is huge, working within the demographics at supervised consumption sites. So we were, as an organization in Alberta, we were tired of using reagents. That is a thing of the past, and it was very disappointing to us to be able to provide these results that we just weren't confident enough to be able to tell somebody that that is what is in your substance. And it kind of started as a pipe dream because these machines are not cheap. And, we're in a time of political change at this time when we were thinking about, okay, we need to move past reagents and move into a time of the future with substance checking. And we literally thought this would take us years. We launched our GoFundMe campaign in November 2nd, 2018. And within 6 months, we had a private funder contact us and tell us that they wanted to buy us an FTIR. And I don't mean just us. I mean for you guys. This is for you guys. This is something that is going to be able to provide Albertans with an actual resource to be able to determine what they're consuming, which is a huge thing because right now, currently there still to this day, there is no sanctioned substance checking method by Alberta Health Services. And as we move forward with the UCP government, and I'm sorry if there's any UCP supporters in the House right now, we will to this day not see a substance checking program in Alberta. This is the first publicly accessed FTIR in Alberta, and I am so proud and thankful for the person who contributed this to us. They decided to step up and spend their own personal money to be able to provide a program in Alberta for people to check their substances. Yeah. So as we move forward, Indigo, we're still operating in a very gray area. We are super fortunate to have the support and outgoing rural RCMP that they understand what we're doing is saving lives. To them, it's less work for them because they're not going to go to an event where batches of bad substances are being sold, or we're able to stop things kind of and give notifications to attendees that, hey, this baggie with this description on is being sold as this. So it allows people and the RCMP to not spend or to not dedicate as much as time to this type of incidences. And it's really beautiful because as a nurse, I was very scared of enacting a program where it's technically illegal. I'm risking my nursing license going out there and testing and providing these services because we don't have an exemption. Moving forward, though, we will. Currently, Indigo is working on our application to have an exemption from the Office of Controlled Substances from Health Canada. So for summer 2020, we will be able to provide these services without having to worry about whether or not we're going to be arrested or have our equipment taken from us. With that being said, I really want to point out to this survey that the City of Edmonton completed. There was over 2,200 people that participated in that, and over 92% of the responses stated that they would like to see or would use substance checking at large masses in Edmonton. When I first started working with the City of Edmonton, I advocated for substance checking to be at these events so hard. And the superintendent of Edmonton Police Services said to me, you know what, Shelby, if you can get your federal exemption, then we will continue the conversation of having you be able to provide these services at these large, massive events. So hopefully, as we move forward within the next year, we'll be able to see these services be provided in Edmonton. Calgary is a different story, and hopefully we'll be able to work on the City of Calgary to be able to have them come around to the idea of substance checking happening. Another interesting fact that I found is that we have only substance checked at 7 different festivals, and we have done over 688 substance checks, and I think that's phenomenal. Oh, thank you. With that being noted, this service will also be available to other demographics. This is not something that I want to keep to ourselves. We are going to be volunteering our time at supervised consumption sites to be able to provide these services to other demographics as well, because this is for all Albertans. This is something that we need in our province. And parting words, there we go. With parting words on that, and as we move forward into even just knowing what funding is going to be available to harm reduction or supervised consumption sites within Alberta is that we need to continuously, this is Dr. Carl Hart, sorry, before I get ahead on this quote, I need to introduce this man right here. This is Dr. Carl Hart. Yes, yes. He is the head of neuroscience and psychology at Columbia University in New York. He has spearheaded the campaign about how people who use substances they come from all walks of life. So you have nurses, doctors, social workers, teachers, policemen, politicians who use substances. So we need to also put continuous pressure on politicians to do more because they are just happy to sit back and do nothing, and it's easier to do nothing. Why do you think the UCP government is looking at cutting funding to harm reduction program? Because it's the money, and they don't see that as a valued service. So as you guys leave here tonight, I really want you to walk away in knowing that this is something you deserve. This is something that we need